And good morning and welcome. Today is Tuesday, September 1st. It is high noon. My name is Ryan Belmore. I am the owner and publisher of Up Newp. And joining me to kick off the conversation here today is Mr. Frank Prosnitz. Good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing all right. And we continue our nice hat, by the way.
Oh, yeah. You recognize that one.
Yes.
My favorite team.
We continue our conversations with the candidates here today, and today we're heading for Rhode Island Congressional District 2.
That we are. Interesting race. You know, one of the questions I'll ask, I wonder why anybody would run for a seat that is likely to disappear. Right?
Huh?
So you have a census. We're in the midst of a census, and unless something surprising happens, Rhode Island is going to be reduced from 2 to 1 congressional seat. And we have 2 people in there now. One will survive. For the new guy on the block, it would seem to be an uphill struggle to get that one seat. So,
well, lucky for you, Frank, I have somebody who could answer that question of why you would run.
What a good idea.
And we are going to bring him up now, and he is Mr. Dylan Conley. And good afternoon and welcome, Dylan.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get to all the fun stuff of you telling us about yourself, well, let's start with Frank's question.
Sure. So I would say first and foremost, to serve a day in Congress is the honor of a lifetime. And then secondarily, I actually think that we have in front of us the next 2 years are a very special window. We look like we're going to have unified government where the presidency, Senate, and House will all be represented by the same party. And in addition, we have a social mandate for change from the populace, the likes of which I've never seen in my entire life. So when you combine those elements, all of the normal impediments to getting legislation passed are gone. So I actually think we can do more in the next 2 years than we've done in the last 50.
Dylan, why don't we start out with, for Congressional District 2, tell us who is Dylan, and a little bit about your background and why you made the crazy decision, some might call it crazy, to run for office.
Sure. So professionally, I'm an attorney. I'm the chairman of the Providence Board of Licenses. I represent a series of municipalities, including East Providence, Johnston School District, Westerly, Warwick Council. Do a lot of civil litigation work. I know local government through and through, so I kind of have a lot of experience in the area of drafting legislation and those sorts of things. Personally, my wife and I live on the west end of Providence, and we have a 19-month-old son.
Have you held any elected office before?
No elected offices, just appointed offices. So my firm, all of the municipalities we work for, that's an appointment. Personally, I've been appointed chair of the Providence Board of Licenses and assistant solicitor in East Providence.
And why you run? Oh, go ahead, Frank.
If we accept everything that you had said initially about believing that Democrats will win the House, will win the Senate, will win the presidency, and that there is this social mandate for change, what can you deliver that Jim Langevin couldn't deliver in that situation?
Sure. I mean, really, it's a distinction in leadership and style. Congressman Langevin likes to wait on the sidelines, wait for a consensus to develop, and then side with that consensus. What we need is bold and aggressive leadership because we have a special window of opportunity the next 2 years. Specifically, I think we can reverse the flow of money in the economy from trickle down to what I refer to as gush up. There's a series of great programs that have been talked about for some years now, which I actually believe are low-hanging fruit that we could do all at once. Expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit. Kamala Harris has a great program on that. The expansion of the Child Tax Credit. The American Families Act is a great program there. Increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And implementing Medicare for all. When you do each of those things, all of them are a small tweak in monthly income for working families, but compounded with each other, you're decreasing the amount of money they have to spend on healthcare. You're increasing their take-home cash on a month-to-month basis. And really, you have money flowing through the bottom of the economy, which means it'll be spent on small businesses. And when it's spent on small businesses, they reinvest.
Dylan, of those items that you mentioned, which ones would Jim Langevin not support?
It's not a question of whether or not he would support these bills. It's a question of whether or not he would do anything to get them passed. His legislative history is 20 years in office, and he's only passed 2 bills. One was to rename a post office, and the other was to remove the Secretary of Education from the Future Farmers of America board. So Congressman Langevin's approach to legislation is really to not drive anything. And right now, Rhode Island needs someone that's going to drive legislation, because this may be our last chance to get anything done with this congressional seat.
Dylan, one of the reasons that we are having this chat today is because I happen to see that you posted on your Facebook page that, it's been a little challenging campaigning thus far. Talk to us about, how it's been since the end of June till now. How are you reaching people? What are you hearing from people?
So the primary way we've been reaching people is through social media, emails, interactions on the website, and a lot of phone calls. If someone says that they're interested in support of the campaign, I reach out directly, and they're helpful in connecting me to other people. What we don't have is normally a campaign schedule is like 5 or 6 different public events a night. Now there might be 5 or 6 public events in the entire state over the course of a month. So because of that, our way to organically reach people is really only directly and only virtually. So that's been a bit different. And media coverage has been different. I think a lot of the media is working from home. They have limited resources. There's a lot of information to cover because of coronavirus. So the race in and of itself, I think it's been difficult to get the amount of coverage that a congressional debate really deserves.
Dylan, talk to us a little bit about the coronavirus and what you would do or what you would support on a federal level that would end up helping Rhode Islanders.
So the first thing and my number one priority going into Congress is to get a monthly stimulus package and that's a monthly stimulus check to every American until the pandemic's over. We all receive those sort of $1,200 checks one time, but a one-time stimulus payment doesn't actually act as stimulus because of the economic uncertainty. People hold on to that money because they don't know if and when they'll need it. And it's a good idea to hold on to that money because, as we can see right now, Congress isn't doing a secondary package. The other thing I would like to do is I would like to pivot the $600 bonus from unemployment to what I refer to as a back to work share program. One of the things we learned during the Great Recession is that long-term unemployment is self-sustaining. So when we create an incentive for people to be unemployed, we're actually harming their long-term employment capacity. What we should do instead is give the bonus to work share. Work share means you're working less than full time. You're still getting paid the same amount that you would normally be paid because you have that additional bonus, and unemployment covers a portion of the gap. And a portion of the bonus should be going to the employer to create an incentive to rehire. If you do that, instead of losing jobs, you're losing hours per week being worked. And that maintains more employment relationships, so we don't negatively impact people's long-term employment status.
Let me see if I've got it clear. So what you would like the employer to do is, rather than lay off an individual, to reduce their hours, and maybe reducing hours of 2 employees rather than laying off 1. And then for that stimulus package to reward the employer with certain payment, as well as the employees to make up for lost wages.
Bingo.
Okay. I'm not as dumb as I look.
It's kind of a mess of a thing to describe very quickly, but you got it perfectly.
Yeah. Good. Ryan, are you with us? Well, maybe he left for a moment. What are some of the things that I'm going to go to the Black Lives Matter, because that's really huge right now, I think.
Sure.
And we have the president is on his way to troubled waters today, and I would assume that you are in agreement with those who believe he should not be going. Would you believe that Vice President Biden should also not go to Kenosha?
I think there's a clear distinction between President Trump and Vice President Biden, and that President Trump is seeking to incite violence, and Vice President Biden is seeking to calm down the situation. I believe President Trump's reelection strategy is to create a war within America, a cultural war, and really he's going out to these hot zones to inflame them. And the country does not need anything to be inflamed right now. We need to be calmed down. We need to be reassured that our future is going to be okay.
Frank, I'm sorry about that. And Dylan, I'm sorry about that. I had a small technical issue So
Did you have a nice drink? Did you go to the bar? Was that?
That's it. That's it. Popped out for a minute. I couldn't. My name was frozen from a previous meeting, so I was trying to change it, and I froze up for a minute.
No, you should put a sweater on.
There we go. Well, I don't think you hit this one. I think I heard the question that you did ask, and I believe you've hit on some of this, but we're going to do it again, Dylan, just in case. And it's top priorities if elected this November.
Sure. The number one thing is getting the monthly stimulus payment so that we kind of have cash flow going into the bottom of the economy, cash flow going to where people will spend it as opposed to saving it in Cayman Islands tax havens. The secondary issue would be to have some more long-term changes. Those are sort of the expansion of the earned income tax credit, child tax credit, minimum wage. And the third issue would be Medicare for all. If you do all of those things in combination, you'll have such an incredible impact on equitable opportunity for the baseline of our economy that you'll see sort of a return on investment that's exponential. It's not just linear. I would expect to see an explosion of creativity coming from the American population if we shore up their bottom line incomes.
So let me ask the question that's always asked: how do you pay for it?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about this moment, which is another reason I was interested in running, is you have to deficit spend to avoid a depression when there's an economic downturn. So right now, your primary goal is getting money into the economy. Long term, you will have to deal with the debt that creates. You can't deal with the debt immediately because you'll stifle the economy. This is something we've known since the original Great Depression, and we learned it again in the Great Recession. What I would expect and what I would hope is that the deficit spending is focused on areas where we see return on investment. That return on investment should start to come out when those payments start to come due. Because it's so cheap to borrow money during an economic crisis, your threshold for return on investment is relatively low. So 2 and 3% returns on investment will pay back the debts that you incur right now. And I think if you spend that money in the base of the economy, that's where you have that multiplier effect of working families spending money on small businesses spending money back in the local economy. That same dollar kicks around a couple of times, and we see growth. The problem is what we've done historically is we've bailed out Wall Street and stockholders and shareholders, and what they do is they save the money. They don't spend it. If our bailout money goes to people that will save the money instead of spending it, we will have serious long-term problems because we won't see return on investment for those expenditures. But if we give the money to people who will spend it immediately, we'll see that short-term and medium-term return on investment necessary to pay back those debts.
What do you see for the future of Social Security?
Yeah, so Social Security is basically, it's insufficient for what the need is. And one of the questions that we have about Social Security is the best way to shore it up and whether or not it should be expanded. Now, when I think about Social Security, I think it fits in perfectly with all of the gush up issues that I've been talking about. When you expand Social Security, that's money that people will spend. That's not money that people save. It's money that they're depending on to pay their monthly bills. So Social Security should not just be looked at as a stability for the individual receiving it, but should also be understood as economic stimulus, and it should be expanded accordingly.
How far would you expand it?
It's a good question. I think it depends on whether or not you have some of those other programs, such as the monthly stimulus package for the pandemic. If you have that monthly stimulus coming in already, how much do you want to expand Social Security in that environment? Once that stimulus package goes away, you should definitely expand Social Security significantly at that point in time to make sure that you're balancing off any lost regular income. So because they're tied together like that, I can't give a clean answer on how I would spend just Social Security. But fundamentally, access to cash on the bottom portion of the economy needs to increase dramatically.
Dylan, where do you land? What is good that's being done, and what has to be done for climate change in Rhode Island?
So the interesting thing about climate change is the Green New Deal is really the only set of goals that addresses the level of seriousness of climate change. But it's a set of goals. It's not specific policies. I think Rhode Island's in an interesting position because of its relationship with the military-industrial complex, and in particular, its relationship with naval engineering. I think that the only infrastructure that has the capacity to address climate change is the military-industrial complex. If you consider what the MIC originally was, it was created to address the existential threat that was conventional warfare. The existential threat facing us today is not conventional warfare, it's climate change. So if we pivot the focus of the military-industrial complex from warfare to climate change, and we start building weapons against climate change instead of weapons of destruction, I think Rhode Island could be a leader in that realm. I mean, we have the engineers necessary for tidal energy, wave energy, massive expansion of offshore wind, which we've already seen start to develop, development of aquaculture opportunities. You know, I think Rhode Island could really be a leader in some of the answers to climate change as a direct result of its historic relationship with the military-industrial complex.
So I guess I'd ask this question. I have several. So if we divert money from military to climate, and clearly climate requires some dollars, we hurt our military, and therefore, do we not put ourselves in a difficult defense position? We're not friends with everybody around the world.
Yeah, I know that we're not friends with everybody around the world, but our rate of expenditure versus, you know, the next 7 or 8 largest nations, we're really overpaying for defense. We're not getting the return on investment that we need. We're basically paying to make sure that an old threat doesn't come back. And in the meantime, we're ignoring a clear and present threat that is climate change. So, you know, every dollar you spend is a dollar you're not spending somewhere else. But I do think a lot of the same corporations, a lot of the same companies, the same engineers, the same experts that are developing sort of Rhode Island's naval warfare capacity could be the same groups of people that could be developing our climate change response capacity. And I really believe that if we do that, we'll see a return on investment for our dollar that we're not seeing when we spend it on the military-industrial complex.
I'm presuming you would advocate our returning to the Paris Accord?
Yes, absolutely.
Dylan, what do you go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, one of the challenges about climate change is that, you know, for everything that we roll back in America, we have to recognize that there are other nations that are still producing coal plants and all those sorts of things. So we have to address it not just individually, but as part of an international economic system. So those sorts of accords, like the Paris Accord, are critical.
What issues are you hearing most about when you talk to people on the phone, connect with people, supporters or other voters?
2 things. It's race and the economy. And I think racial relations and the economy are inherently interwoven with each other. I don't think you can address one without approaching the other. When I talk about the gush up economy, the reason why I focus on that is if you're going to have a conversation about housing, education, or health, those are all fundamentally conversations about poverty. So if you want to talk about racial inequity, that's a conversation about poverty. So not the only issue, but a core issue to all of our challenges is economic inequity. So I think the way you approach all of them is by ensuring that average American families, average working people are getting more money for their labor.
We've talked about a couple of things. I'm wondering about how do we regain or restore our status as a world leader? We've lost that certainly over the last 3 years.
Yeah, I think a return to dignity and integrity on the international level is critical. I think what we've done as a nation over the last several years is basically just raw emotional vitriol of all things we don't like, and we haven't been clear on policy. We haven't given our allies any meaningful reason to trust that we'll do what we say that we're going to do. And I think from that perspective, if we just have some stability and clarity coming from the president, then we'll see basically a rather quick return to American leadership, because America needs to play that role. We are the most powerful country in the history of the world. The world does look to us for leadership. There's a vacuum now, but no one can fill that vacuum except for the United States. So we need to return to that role.
What are some of the things that the Trump administration has done that you in Congress would seek to roll back?
Well, all of their reversals of environmental programs, the use of the Department of Justice as the president's personal attack dog, those are things that bother me deeply. And, I think all of the reversals to healthcare are things that need to be addressed, but we don't need to change the changes to Obamacare back to where Obamacare was before the Trump administration. We just need to implement Medicare for all. We just need to move forward. And, I believe that because of unified government and the mandate for change, instead of just doing that ping pong game where we normally just reverse whatever the previous administration has done, we can take large steps forward. And we can focus much more on our future than on our past.
Dylan, Rhode Island is normally based last in business climate or near last for business climate. What do we do for the small businesses out there, especially with the challenges they're facing with COVID-19? How do we get that meter moving in the right direction, the business climate in Rhode Island?
So small businesses lose out from all these federal programs because they're designed to be top down. They go through these really huge corporations. They go through shareholders. They go through banks. But Rhode Island's about 90% small businesses. Small businesses really get their money from revenue, from customers, from local people. So I think it's an indirect approach, but it's the only way to actually get small businesses money is to make sure that working families and average labor people are bringing more cash home. When I have more cash, I spend it locally. I'm going to go out to another restaurant. I'm going to go to another show. I'm going to buy another newspaper subscription, et cetera. When mega corporations have more money, it can very often go into savings, or when it trickles down through employment. Salaries are relatively low. We've seen over the last 50 years a huge drop in worker power relative to incomes generated by corporations. So the way the federal government's traditionally tried to get Rhode Islanders money doesn't work for us. If you're in New York or Boston and you have billionaires walking around and a couple dozen Fortune 500 companies with headquarters, it works great. But when you're Rhode Island and you're really small businesses, the platform of dumping money into the largest companies in the world doesn't work.
So it seems pretty clear that you would, I don't know whether you would label yourself this way, but I certainly think that you are a progressive in your policies. Are you in conversation with anybody in Congress now, or any organizations nationwide that are associated with the progressive movement?
No. So this wasn't a race I was planning on running. It was something I was compelled to do. So, I was making this decision in late May, early June. By that time, all these national organizations have largely figured out who they're going to be working with, who they're going to be supporting. I've enjoyed my conversations with them, and I look forward to working with them in the future. But this campaign is a campaign of passion. It's a campaign of recognizing what this moment is and meeting the moment. It's not a campaign about my personal long-term political aspirations. It's a campaign about now.
We talked a little bit about the small businesses and, families and things like that. Wondering what we do to make Rhode Island a more attractive and affordable place for families, for seniors, for everybody. How do we actually make it? How do we make a change there?
Yeah, so this is actually something that the pandemic, the long-term impact of the pandemic may be positive for Rhode Island. There's really seriously thriving economies in Boston and New York, and we're sandwiched right between the two of them. And we haven't really been able to ride those coattails the way I think we should. And now that everyone can have these meetings virtually, you don't need to go into the office every day. Maybe it's once a week. Maybe it's a couple times a month. If that's the case, the quality of living in Rhode Island is so high that you can work in New York or Boston and live in Rhode Island because you can do so much virtually. If you start to see that grow, I think you'll start to see an injection of income taxes, which will then have the ability of Rhode Island to spend more and be able to provide services and infrastructure at a higher quality that's more comparative to Boston and New York, and you'll start to see that quality of life improve even more.
What do you say to people who say, Dylan, you're a smart guy, you've got some great ideas, but you've never done this political thing before. Don't you think you ought to get a little bit of experience out locally or statewide before you're running for a congressional office?
Sure. Two things on that. Experience-wise, my whole life is being an attorney for government agencies. I know and have a deep understanding of how all of this works. The second portion of it, and this is something that I think Rhode Island has a bit of an establishment issue, where people want you to wait your turn. And I take umbrage with that because that's completely against the Rhode Island ethos. We're founded by Roger Williams because he wouldn't wait his turn to get policies done the way he wanted to see them. He just left and did it himself. You know, the burning of the Gaspee, we were the first to declare war against Britain. We were the last to join the Union. Rhode Island's identity is born from doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because someone gave you permission to do it. And in this moment, this is about our future. I will never see a more important election in my entire life. And so I'm stepping forward to try to meet this moment.
If you lose this election, are you going to remain active and look to run for another office that you can perhaps press some of your policies or your ideas?
Yeah, this is the start. I think what we've been able to build in terms of my campaign team, my supporters, a lot of the conversations I've been having with people on the ground about how thirsty they are for change, how thirsty they are for fresh blood. I owe it to all of them to continue this charge in the most important and relevant ways possible. What that will be, I don't know, but I'm very confident that we're actually going to see that this campaign goes across the finish line in September and then again in November, because people are ready for change. The demand for change is nothing like I've ever seen.
Dylan, speaking of, go ahead.
I was just going to ask whether you've had conversations with Congressman Cicilline at all.
No, nothing in particular. I bumped into him the other night before the Latino Public Radio interview. I've known Congressman Cicilline a long time, and I think he does a lot of great work in Washington.
Speaking about long time and change, I don't think it would ever happen, but just interesting conversation. Would you favor term limits in any government offices, races?
Yeah, I do. But here's that's the first blush answer, but it's a partial lie because you can't deliver. The problem with term limits on the congressional level is it effectively requires an amendment to the Constitution, and you need every single person in Congress to vote against their best interest in order to accomplish that. So I think it's really unlikely. What you can do in the interim is make competitive elections. The desire for term limits is really a recognition that our elections aren't giving the outcomes that we want. If we had campaign finance reform, such as democracy dollars, legally required debates, I can't even get the congressman to debate me. You'd really just make each one of these elections much, much, much more competitive. The desire for term limits slides down when we have an actually competitive election, a legitimate election, as opposed to an election that's really just designed to maintain incumbency inertia.
What do you think would come out in a debate?
Sure. I think one of the big issues is all of the congressman's investments in stocks. He doesn't seem to put policy first. He seems to prefer his portfolio. He invested between $50,000 and $100,000 in his brother's company. The day before that company got a $570 million contract from the U.S. Post Office. He bought airlines, cruises, and housing the day before he bailed out each of those industries. He sold off $250,000 to $500,000 of Alibaba stock very shortly before the Senate introduced a bill that wiped out Alibaba's Alibaba's value. These sorts of things strike me as directly in conflict with what the people's interest is. And when members of Congress can own their own stock, they can change policy to benefit their portfolio at the expense of the best interest of the people. And we can't really trust that they're putting our interests first if they have massive financial stake in the individual companies.
So do you think that members of Congress shouldn't be able to own stock?
They should only be able to own index funds, which is basically an ownership of the entirety of a market. That's the same sort of thing that the vast majority of us own in our retirement accounts. So that way, their interest is actually aligned with our interest.
They could put it in a blind trust. Or they could. There are a number of things they could do that might be different. Let me ask you about federally funded campaigns. Your opponent has about $1.2 million in, at least according to the last reporting period, in his campaign fund. You have about $9,400. Not a very even playing field. How would you deal with campaign finance?
Yeah, so I think the best way to approach it is something that was espoused by Senator Gillibrand and Andrew Yang. It's a program called Democracy Dollars. And what that is every single American citizen has $1,000 that they can donate to the candidate of their choice. So that allows me to kind of reach out to people. And when I ask for money, I'm asking not for their hard-earned dollars that they should be spending on food.
Oh, I think you came unplugged there, Dylan.
Got me?
You got you.
I thought you were ventriloquist for a minute.
We got to hard-earned dollars on they should be spending on food.
Yeah, so instead, if people had a federally allocated $1,000 that they could donate to a candidate, what you start to see is an ability for candidates to actually fundraise very, very quickly. And so it won't put you on quite the same level playing field as someone who's been in Congress for 20 years, but there's diminishing returns on that money. I mean, if I was able to raise $50,000 to $75,000, this is a very competitive election. And I would be able to do that pretty quickly if all of my donors that are giving me $10 and $25 could give me $1,000.
So where would that money come from? If you're talking $1,000 for each voter, that's an extraordinary amount of money across the nation. Where does that money come from?
So I think that's something that you can deal with either in campaign finance, more generally, basically allocating a portion of funds that's being poured out by these PACs and special interest groups to an account that will then fund the $1,000 donations, or you can do it from the general fund.
Do you advocate increasing the tax for the wealthiest Americans?
Absolutely. Not just on income tax, but more importantly on wealth. Everyone knows about income inequality, but people don't understand that income inequality doesn't hold a candle to wealth inequality. The very highest end of our economy owns almost all of our economy. And that system just doesn't work well. It actually just doesn't create for a dynamic economy. It creates for a stagnant economy where we maintain the power brokers as opposed to being creative.
Dylan, we have some educational opportunities down here in Newport, and certainly there are plenty. Every school district in the state can certainly find ways to improve. There's always room to improve, even the best school system in America. What do we start doing to improve education here in Rhode Island or in Congressional District 2?
Yeah, there's two answers to that. One is a long-term answer, and the other is the short-term answer in the pandemic. But the long-term answer comes back to these sort of economic inequities. There are studies that indicate that schools are only about 30% responsible for educational outcomes, that the other 70% is the child's home. So we're asking these teachers in schools to cure all of these educational outcomes when they only really have control over 30% of the outputs. If people had stable homes with equal economic opportunity, if they knew where their next meal was going to come from, if they were sure they were going to have a roof over their heads, then it's a lot easier for their children to focus in the classroom. During the pandemic, I have been dumbstruck by the lack of federal leadership, both about the pandemic generally and specifically about the schooling issue. Even if we completely failed to prepare ourselves for a pandemic up to this moment, we have known since March that children were going to return to school now, and yet there is no serious program. The federal government controls all of your bandwidth and airwaves from the frequencies of your Wi-Fi, your cell phone connectivity, radio waves, television. They could have been producing educational programs for every single tier of school for the entire country, and then all of our teachers here could have been working off of those programs in virtual one-on-one environments with children. That's a gimme. I'm not an expert in the education realm, but the fact that we're not even doing that goes to show you that we don't have governance. We have reactionary politics. Congress and the federal government just mudslings at each other, looks for the opportunity for the next tweet, and never bothers to plan for our future. And that's unacceptable. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see this demand for change right now.
So maybe you touched on one of the biggest subjects, which is reactionary politics, which is also very partisan politics. There was a time, John Chafee, who was a senator from Rhode Island, could easily cross the aisle and talk with his Democratic counterparts. Tip O'Neill could cross the aisle and talk to his Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, famous for their cooperation in trying to resolve things. That has more so than not been the American way. We have never been so divided in this country, period, and never so divided in terms of Congress. First, do you feel comfortable that you can, coming from a progressive standpoint, that you can work across the aisle? And secondly, how do you become a part of changing that dynamic so that in fact there is more bipartisan support of major issues?
So personally, I have no issue reaching across the aisle. My number one goal is to get things done. There's a group of politicians where I think when they go out in the world, they would rather be right than get something done. And I'm not like that. I don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I will move legislation forward, and I will work with people across the aisle to get there. You need to identify low-hanging fruit, which people agree on, and build from there. So that's sort of me personally, how I would go about it. On a system-wide level, I actually think that the result of gerrymandering, we've made so many districts in this country safe Democratic districts or safe Republican districts that there's no incentive to hold any position that could be used against you in a primary. So we've basically, politicians choose their voters instead of voters choosing their politicians. And because of that, we're moving further and further and further apart because no districts are competitive. They're only competitive within their own party. So that polarization needs to be dealt with by making gerrymandering an apolitical procedure, which creates competitive districts as opposed to safe districts.
Who oversees that?
Each individual state. But
it's the legislatures now that oversee it, and of course, legislators are partisan. So the party in power is going to do whatever or configure these districts in any way they want, with the exception of occasionally a court might overturn what the legislature does.
So you nailed it. The court's overturning it based on legislation that's being designed at the federal level, and Congress can, especially through its control of the purse strings, create incentives and requirements that those sorts of districts, competitive districts, are required. So state legislature can implement however way they want to approach it, but they have to have an outcome in which the districts are competitive.
Dylan, looking at some of your policies and priorities, let's move down the list a little bit. Tell me what ideas you have for healthcare. Very big, obviously, with COVID-19 on the mind. How do we fix, or what needs to be fixed in the healthcare world?
So when you look at how healthcare has evolved across the world, what we've seen is that single payer, or the way we refer to it in America, Medicare for all, ends up being the preferred option. The best way to understand this is you look at the Australian model, which is a public option, which has split. You can either have the government cover your insurance, or you can buy private insurance. People so dramatically prefer the government's insurance that the government is now having to artificially prop up the private insurance sector. That's basically a market study proof that the only way to do health insurance is through single payer, which is Medicare for all. The other thing you need to be doing is the federal government needs to be the pharmacy of last resort. What we see as a business strategy of a lot of pharmaceutical companies is to buy up patents for medicine that's absolutely necessary for someone to live, where there's no market competition for that medicine. They buy that patent, and then they increase the price of that medication through the roof. So what used to cost you $13 a month now costs you $10,000, $15,000 a year, but you have no choice but to pay it because you can't live without it. in those scenarios, the government needs to have the capacity to start to make its own medicine, its own generic version of that medicine. This is something that's been proposed by both Elizabeth Warren and Andrew Yang, and it's a way that we can have a market approach to solving a market failure and really kind of decrease the cost of pharmaceuticals for average Americans.
So Medicare for All has its opponents, labor unions that have fought fiercely to get medical programs in contracts, and will be looking, I would think, to be for some compensation coming back to replace all of that effort. We would have private insurers certainly would be hurt by this, and perhaps cause some other labor problems. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, when you shift from private healthcare to single payer, there is market challenges. It's where people have better outcomes in the long run. So managing that transition will be difficult. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this is something that you can kind of, you do this, that, and it's not a problem. That's not the case. We've learned this really all across the whole world. But what you do see is that people prefer single payer healthcare, and those sorts of market inefficiencies that we see from the private healthcare companies will iron themselves out. And really, the labor union should be compensated more just in terms of their salary. So I would hope that a portion of Medicare for All would result in an increase in take-home cash for the same labor unions that fought for their private healthcare in the first place.
How important do you think labor unions are?
Absolutely critical. The number one reason we've seen a decline in worker power over the last 50 years is because we've seen a decrease in private labor unions. What people don't really understand is when labor unions set a standard in a market, people that aren't even in the labor union see benefits from that. There's a really important economic study that just came out from two economists, Larry Summers, I believe, was one, and I'm blanking on the woman who's the second one. But they show that the decrease in labor unions has led to a decrease in take-home cash for everyone in America, with the exception of shareholders.
Keeping with, well, I guess it's not keeping with, it's a completely different segue. I don't have a segue for it. So we'll just go with.
Make one up. Just make one up.
Yeah. Speaking of that.
There you go.
Making things fair and equitable for all. We've talked a little bit about systemic racism, Black Lives Matter. What do we do for maybe some of our other groups, LGBT, QIA? How do we make, it's about time it happens, how do we make it fair, balanced, right for all?
Two quick things. One, again, is the economics of it. We know that you can take someone's zip code, their gender, race, ethnicity, and sexuality, all things that are true of them before they are born, and you can make predictions about their health and wealth. That's proof that we're not truly free. Things that have nothing to do with our own decisions and our own work cannot control our outcomes. So when we get back to that economic equity, I will work to have a more equal opportunity economy until those factors no longer control our outcomes. The second thing is we need to be honest about who we are. I learned about the Tulsa Massacre by watching HBO's The Watchmen. I was a history major at Boston College. I know American history. How it didn't come to my attention that we firebombed American civilians because of their race is utterly spectacular to me. And we need to recognize that in terms of the LGBTQ history in this country as well. And until we know America, not just for its successes, but also for its failures, we're not respecting ourselves. We're not respecting our own history. And we won't know how to succeed in future challenges until we realize how we've overcome challenges in our past.
So one of the reasons that you don't hear of certain things is because the media has been really stripped down over the last few years. We've had a president that has been an expert at spewing out fake news, and been an expert at accusing the media of fake news. And so the trust in the media is at probably its lowest level. Print is if not gone, at least in deep trouble. There are those that are suggesting that perhaps government provide a bailout for the print media in order to help to create once again a vibrant press. Where are you with all of that?
I couldn't agree more. My experience, both professionally up until this moment and during this campaign, is I have witnessed what reporters are being asked to do. I have a rough idea of how much they're being paid to do it. And I have a rough idea of how much news out there that isn't really being reported, not for lack of trying, but it's just a lack of bandwidth and capacity. So not only does the media, and particularly journalism and investigative journalism, need a bailout now, we need to actually shift the way the funding works for those types of things, because a free society does not work without a robust media. That is something that I don't think there's a proposal that could possibly be too ambitious to try to address. I'm not sure exactly what the answer is yet, but what I know is our democracy is really being challenged because we don't have the fourth estate the way we need it.
Want to talk about cannabis for a minute. How can cannabis help or hurt Rhode Island?
Yeah, so cannabis is two things. It's an economic opportunity and it's an opportunity for racial equity. We need to recognize that the groups, and particularly people of color, particularly African Americans, who have been disproportionately impacted by maintaining cannabis as being illegal, should be the same group that benefit from its legalization. Legalization to cannabis is not just an opportunity for increased economic growth, but that's both a federal and a state level opportunity. If we legalize it at the federal level, states will see increased revenues, which we will need to come back from the pandemic. And you're moving dollars from the black market to legal markets. And I think you really start to see sort of benefits from the ground up. But we need to do it in such a way that it costs that you and I could open a cannabis facility, not just someone with $2 million lying around to, get only one of two permits, et cetera, et cetera. It needs to be a true market, and it needs to be an opportunity for people the same way the craft beer industry is an opportunity for people.
No, I was just thinking as you were talking about that, we had the campaign going back a number of years, a chicken in every pot. Maybe we could do something like a plant in every pot. Never mind, that's bad.
Yeah, there we go. I'm with that.
Wow, Frank.
I had to reach for that one. I do have another question, and that's on infrastructure.
Sure.
We're addressing that in Rhode Island in sometimes a very painful way as I go down the road and find out I can't ride on it until they fix it. Nationally, we have the same kind of infrastructure problems. And I know that Trump and also Democrats and Republicans have all talked about an infrastructure bill, but we haven't had one. How important is that? And is that a way to get people back to work?
Yeah, infrastructure is critical, and it's great to spend on during a deficit, during a down economy, because its return on investment is really high. But the way we approach infrastructure in America is very short-sighted, and this comes back to we only care about politics and not governance. We like to pass an infrastructure bill that's like a one-time check. And okay, we're going to repair all these 10 things. We're going to build these 6 new things. And we completely ignore the fact that there is going to be long-term maintenance required. We need to shift the way we approach infrastructure to not only recognizing the cost to build out, but the cost to maintain. And when we do that, I think we'll start to strategize differently on the types of infrastructure that we build out. We can focus more on things like mass transit, connecting major cities, and kind of having an infrastructure system that's easier to sustain in the long run.
I just have to comment here on that. I couldn't agree more. I think what happened in Rhode Island is the failure to put money where it was destined. There was no money there for the maintenance of our roads and our bridges, and therefore we're in the position we're at. And if you allow roads and bridges and airports go right down the road to you build them up and they deteriorate. It costs you more money in the long run, for sure.
Absolutely.
Dylan, if elected, do you think is the quickest, easiest, or first thing that you could do that would make a positive change in Rhode Island?
It's that $2,000 a month monthly stimulus. I mean, if you get that monthly stimulus check out, there's 500,000 people in Congressional District 2. You're talking millions upon millions upon millions of dollars pouring in cash into the local economy immediately. And, I still think everyone should be paying their income taxes on that. That's both at the state and federal level. So that should actually help balance some of the state's budgetary issues. And you have that immediate influx of cash. And again, the second thing is Medicare for all, because one of the things that people don't realize, and I've had my father is the Rhode Island Senate Finance Chairman. I work with a series of municipalities. I have a deep understanding of how expensive other post-employment benefits are. OPEB liabilities are healthcare expenses paid by government organizations. If Medicare for all moves those debts to the federal level, you're giving local governments and state governments a budgetary reprieve. They will spend that money elsewhere. So you'll see an influx of cash that's going somewhere other than insurance companies. So maybe it is that we can start to repair those roads. Maybe it is that we can start to improve the schools. Maybe all of a sudden we have enough money where elementary schools have the right kind of ventilation so that they can safely reconvene, et cetera, et cetera. So one of my biggest focuses is, just like we were talking about with the roads and the long-term maintenance, we need to consider policy not just for the value of my press release, but for how it will work and have downstream impacts. And I think those two programs would have huge downstream impacts that would work really well for Rhode Islanders.
Dylan, are there any topics, issues, things that we didn't get to today that you want to bring up?
I just want to remind everyone that early voting is available. You can go to your town hall, city hall right now, go to your board of canvassers, fill out your ballot. The primary is September 8th.
1 week away.
1 week away. And it's really important that you vote in these primary elections, especially in Rhode Island, because it's a Democratic Party dominated state. A lot of people participate in the general that don't participate in the primary, but some of our most competitive and most important elections occur in the primary. So I hope I've earned your support if you're listening, but if I haven't, I don't care. I still need you to go out and vote. I still need you to go out and vote and participate.
Dylan, what are some of the things that you love about Rhode Island? Some of the things that you and your family enjoy doing in Rhode Island?
Eating. The food scene in Rhode Island is absolutely outrageous. We spend a lot of our time in Providence and Newport. That's really where we hang out the most. And going to all the restaurants and bars. I mean, I'm the chairman of the board of licenses in Providence. I've been able to meet.
Yeah, so you have to go to the bar.
Exactly. It's a job requirement. But I mean, the craft beer scene and not just the quality of the food, but like my wife and I can walk in anywhere with our 19-month-old son and people are happy to see us and we can get a table immediately. It's not like New York where I got to make a reservation and everyone's going to frown because I'm a family of three. Like, I feel welcomed everywhere I go in Rhode Island, and it's just so amazing that we have these tiny pockets of like true Rhode Island culture. They're not big chains; they're mom and pop places, and it's just that flavor that I love.
Places, ways people can get in touch with you if they want to find out more information or to support your campaign.
ConleyForCongress.com. That's ConleyForCongres. And I'm on Facebook. Dylan Conley for Congress, Instagram, _Dylan Conley, Twitter @Dylan2DC. And if you reach out to me, I am the one that personally responds to all the messages. You're not getting an intern. You're not getting a robot. You're getting me. So it might take me a couple hours to get back to you, but it will be me talking to you.
Excellent. And so everybody knows that the primary is September 8th. And as I've been saying now for 27 videos or something. Everybody in Rhode Island has a responsibility. There is a reason to go in every single community, every single district, and vote in the primary, either this week or on Tuesday. We have invited your Democratic opponent on. to join us for a discussion. Hopefully we have him. If we do have him and he agrees to it, you would agree to having a little forum where we have the both of you?
Anytime, any place, anywhere, any rules, Rhode Island deserves the debate.
All right. Well, we'll see what we can do. Of course, we'll give him his own hour as well, and then perhaps we can get something scheduled. We'll see. Frank, you're in charge of that.
Yeah, well, we've got the invite out. I've sent that out, and we'll hopefully hear from him. I've sent it out through 2 different ways, so we'll see whether we hear from him.
Thank you.
All right, Dylan. Well,
thank you.
We appreciate it, and we will chat with you soon. ConleyforCongress.com, everything you need to know. And Dylan, we wish you the very best of luck.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. And that is Dylan Conley, who is running from Congressional District 2. Primary is Tuesday. You can vote in your city or town hall this week, pretty much 8:30 to 4:30, 8 to 4. Check with your local city town hall.
Come back morning and night?
Only once.
You only go once.
All right, Mr. Prosnitz, we got that in.
Yeah, what was nice about that is to be able to address some issues on a broader and national basis.
In 1 week, we have gone from city streets to congressional
State House, right?
Yes,
State House and to Congress.
Yes,
it's great though. It is. I like it just from a personal standpoint, in that it forces us to understand the issues a little bit. And to get into that kind of discussion and hear people's thinking. Certain things are becoming much clearer as we go through, when we hear the different candidates' positions. And we're going to keep doing this, right? We're going to go right up until the general election. And frankly, if we like it, we can, we'll go back and we'll do it all over again and talk to the losers one more time. Wait, no, that's not it.
Well, it's funny, and the governor is about to go on, so people can watch that live on our Facebook page here in just a few moments. But I will say that tomorrow we are back at the State House. We are heading for District 71 tomorrow, and we will have Michelle McGaugh in 71, which is Portsmouth, Little Compton, and Tiverton. And she is a Democratic candidate, and she is facing off against John Edwards V on Tuesday. So Michelle will join us tomorrow. And
that should be really interesting, because that's one of that's a race in which there are some very clear differences in who they're aligned with. So it'll be interesting to talk with her.
And we'll keep the conversations going. And our full coverage is available on whatsupnewp.com, as well as I want to give a shout out to our friends at the Boston Globe Rhode Island office, who will be linking to our interviews and coverage later in the week in one of their newsletters. They have asked us for a list of all the interviews we've done. So we appreciate when we get acknowledged by some of our friends in the media. And when they say, you know what? They've done the interview. Why don't you guys just go here and do it? And saves everybody a little bit of time. And we appreciate Dan McGowan and crew over there at Boston Globe Rhode Island office for giving us a shout out. And
also helping people understand the issues that are important in this election. Hope people are reading it and viewing it.
True. All right, Mr. Prosnitz. Well, I got to get over to the governor. She is on in moments. And
Give her my best.
Speaking for about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And she will be discussing reopening of schools and testing today. And why don't you give me a call a little bit later?
Okay, good deal.
All right. On behalf of Mr. Frank Prosnitz, as well as myself, we want to thank Mr. Conley for joining us for the discussion today. If you missed any portion of this conversation, you can go back and watch it all, share it with your friends, family, enemies, whoever you want to. Just be an informed voter. Once again, Dylan is participating in the September 8th primary. You could vote now, or you could vote on September 8th. We encourage you to vote once during that time period. We have invited Mr. Langevin, his Democratic opponent, to join us. And when he gets back to us, we will have that conversation with him. All right, that's going to do it for us today.